Hello everyone, Frank DeMore here with the End Times Research Ministry. Today is April the 27th, 2016. I want to talk a little bit about the Golan Heights that is owned by and defended by the Israelis. Now before I get into what the Word has to tell us about the last days, I want to show you a recent event that took place in Israel with Benjamin Netanyahu on the Golan Heights. You're going to see why this area is so important. Watch the video.
The Israeli cabinet held its ever first meeting on the Golan Heights on Sunday. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the territory would remain Israel's forever.
I chose to hold this festival cabinet meeting on the Golan Heights to deliver a clear message. The Golan Heights will forever remain in Israel's hands. Israel will never withdraw from the Golan Heights.
Israel captured the Golan Heights from Syria in the 1967 Mideast War and annexed it in 1981. The move is never recognized by the international community.
So here we have the Prime Minister of Israel assuring the world that the Golan Heights isn't going to go anywhere or given back to anyone, and that includes Syria. Now there was an act of war in 1967 where Syria and some of the other Arab nations came down to try to destroy the nation of Israel. And so Israel won that war, and because they won the war, they were able to claim that land for their own territory. And as the video said, in 1981, that was annexed. In other words, they were controlling it to the point where they were never going to get rid of it. They need it as a buffer zone. And that buffer zone will always be there for protection of the nation of Israel because it allows them time to react on any enemy that's coming towards them at the Golan Heights. So what we do know from history is Israel has already faced some major wars. But we also know that Israel is going to be facing some other wars that are worse than they have already faced. We know this from the Bible. We know this from Psalm 83, which indicates that Syria is going to attack Israel with the bordering nations around Israel. That hasn't happened yet, and I believe that the Golan Heights may play a huge role in the next coming war. But what's very interesting to me is the fact that now there's a lot of talk, for example, about the UN saying that Israel's ownership of the Golan Heights is not internationally recognized. So we know by the talk that's going on, there's going to be a conflict. We see this kind of conflict in the scriptures. Let me go now to what the Bible has to say about Bashan, which is the name in the Old Testament, but it is the Golan Heights. That's the name of it. So we're going to take a look at Zechariah chapter 11, verse 2. It says this: "Open thy doors, O Lebanon." And of course, Lebanon is north of Israel. Actually, you'll see it borders with the nation of Israel. All right, so now I'm going to bring you to chapter 2 of the book of Isaiah. I'm going to start in verse 1. And you'll see why it becomes really important to understand what's going on when it's talking about Bashan, or the Golan Heights. It says, "The word that Isaiah the son of Amos saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall come to pass in the last days." So when are these events that we're going to be reading about going to take place? In the last days. It means in our generation, when all of the signs that Jesus Christ warned about were taking place all at the same time. And we know that Israel was born again as a nation. That fulfilled that prophecy. And Jesus said about the fig tree, when you read it in Matthew chapter 24, the generation who saw the fig tree that was putting forth its leaves and it was still tender, in other words, it was a young nation, that generation would not pass away until all these things take place. So when we read in verse 2 about the last days, we know what he's talking about. It's our generation. So once again, in the last days, that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. So what is he talking about here in verse 2? Well, he is actually talking about this mountain where the third temple is going to be, because we know that people are going to be flocking to it in the last days. Look at this in verse 3. It says, "And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So the temple is going to be rebuilt. We know that for sure. People are going to be going to it. We know when, in the last days. Now, this is becoming very interesting, because when you go now to verse 13, let's go down there. We know what we're dealing with in the last days, because this is where we see Bashan, or, if you will, I'm going to replace the modern day Golan Heights. Okay, so verse 13 says this, and upon all the cedars of Lebanon, and we know that Lebanon is directly north of Israel, that are high and lifted up, and upon all the oaks of Bashan, or the Golan Heights, and upon all the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall. So anyone who goes over to Israel right now, they know that there's problems going on in Lebanon. There's problems going on in Syria. And Syria used to own the Golan Heights, and they want it back. So we also know that if you go to Israel right now, you'll see fences all over the place on the borders of Israel and Lebanon and Israel and Syria. I've been there. I've seen those fences. So everything in here shows us a conflict is coming in Bashan, the Golan Heights, which is owned by Israel. So some kind of exchange is going to take place, some kind of conflict or war that, guess what, will eventually lead us to seeing the rebuilding of this temple, the house. And many people shall go and say, come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of God of Jacob. Now, that house was there in 70 AD. That's when the last date of it took place, because that's in 70 AD is when the second Jewish temple was burned down. So that is where the third temple will be going on that hill. Now, concerning Bashan, or the Golan Heights, as I said, the UN is trying to force the hand of Israel concerning the Golan Heights. They want this area to be given back. As you're going to see, they do not recognize Israel's holding on to the Golan Heights. Now, as far as Israel concerned, when it comes to the UN and their trying to force the hand to give the land back to the Syrians, we know that by the current speech, the Prime Minister of Israel said that is never going to happen. And this is paving the way for the future conflict that will allow, at the end of the day, the rebuilding of the house of God, or that temple that Paul warns us about in the last days. So what takes place in Bashan? The Golan Heights, very significant. And here's the current UN speech concerning Bashan, or the Golan Heights.
Now on Golan Heights, the members of the Security Council were briefed by Assistant Secretary General Zerahon on the situation in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights, recording all relevant Security Council resolutions on the issue, including resolutions 242, 338, and 497. Council members expressed their deep concern over recent Israeli settlements about the Golan, and stressed that the status of the Golan remains unchanged. The members also recalled the resolution 497 decided that the Israeli decision to impose its laws, jurisdiction, and administration in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights was null and void, and without international legal effect. The members further called on the parties to comply with the provisions of 1974 Disengagement of Forces Agreement. The members reiterated the need for negotiations to establish a comprehensive, just, and lasting peace.
Now, in case you don't know what this Israel-Syria Separation of Forces Agreement in 1974 is, that is a separation agreement that Israel and the Syrians would not fight each other. They wouldn't attack each other. That agreement was made on May 31st, 1974. Now, in part of the text in an agreement, it says, Israel and Syria will scrupulously observe a ceasefire on land, sea, and air, and will refrain from all military actions against each other. From the time of the signing of the document, in implementation of the United Nations Security Council Resolution 338, dated October the 22nd, 1973. In number 2, it says, the military forces of Israel and Syria will be separated in accordance with the following principles. And then it gets technical because it draws some lines where Israel can go and where Syria can go. But the bottom line is it was supposed to be for a separation of these two enemies so that they wouldn't attack each other. Now, obviously, because what's going on in Syria, they've had a civil war now for almost 5 years. And there's been some skirmishes that have gone from the Syrian border over to Israel. So Israel, as you can see from one of these articles from the War is Boring, an article talking about how Israel has struck into Syria because of the enemies coming across the borders. So there's been violations of this 1974 agreement. Everything that we're seeing is leading down the pathway to fulfill the prophecies that we just saw concerning the third temple and the Bashan conflict that will no doubt help rise this temple. And of course, when the temple is built, that means Antichrist is on the scene. All these things, as Isaiah points out, in the last days. And you, my friends, are in those last days.